Welcome everyone to the May 2020 Soils Network of Knowledge webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Clare Edwards. I've known Clare for a really long time actually now, and I think she's an excellent person to talk about how to engage the community, having been the agronomist in Armidale with New South Wales DPI for about 16 years and following the position that she holds now, which is with the Central Tablelands Local Land Services as the Senior Land Services Officer Pastures, and she's usually located in Mudgee. Throughout her career, Clare's been involved in numerous projects focused on co-learning in agriculture, from trials for pasture species, liming, hard-seeded legumes to tropical grass demonstrations. And she's written about those, which is great, which is why we've got those handouts. She's coordinated several women in agriculture groups and precision agriculture groups, and currently she's part of the Precision Agricultural Research Group at UNE, as well as her substantive position with LLS. So thank you very much, Clare, for agreeing to present this month's webinar.
Okay, thanks, Abby and Luke. You've been fantastic to get me to this point. Today I'm going to be talking about fostering soil health knowledge in landholders and just some of my experiences in the area that I've been doing this work in the last 5-6 years. And I'm going to talk about an example of how these soil workshops can also lead to further outcomes, not unexpected outcomes, but certainly outcomes which have been quite exciting as well. So as Abby said, my name's Clare Edwards. I'm a Senior Land Service Officer Pastures with the Central Tablelands Local Land Services, and I'm based in Mudgee. So where's the Central Tablelands Local Land Services? Right in the middle of New South Wales. The major towns in this region include things like towns like Bathurst and Blaney and Clare, Orange, Lithgow, Oberon and Mudgee. And you can see that in this area, we've got the slopes area around that 500 to 600 metres in height, up to the 1200 to 1400 metres in high parts of the high tablelands. So we have this quite a diverse of tablelands and slopes kind of area covering the Central Tablelands. I'm going to talk about the area that I cover, which is the Midwestern Regional Local Government area, the Lithgow area, the Oberon and parts of the Bathurst Regional area as well. My colleague Phil Cranny also has been running some of these workshops in his area, but I'm just going to focus on what I've been doing and some of the outcomes from those workshops.
Sorry to interrupt, Clare. I don't know if anyone else can see it, but I can actually see your control panel, which we're not supposed to see.
Okay.
So,
how do I remove this?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so just in terms of the area that I cover, the pastures are mainly perennial based, warm season and cool season, and they're introduced and they're native as well. More uniform rainfall in parts of the area, maybe a little bit more winter dominant in the further south we get into the area, and a bit more warm based perennial pastures in the slopes kind of country. But generally my area that I'm going to be talking about and where these workshops are being held are extensive livestock grazing areas. So they're sheep and cattle, sheep for wool and for meat, and for cattle as well. So they're variable landscapes. And you can see here gently rolling hills. This is a granite-based landscape, gently rolling hills, but also flats, rivers and creeks where there's alluvial soils. And you can see here this is a lucerne paddock, but also for cropping on those alluvial soils. But also on the bottom photograph, you can see there that's the sandstone escarpment of the Blue Mountains, and you can see that sandstone-based soils types as well. So we've got granites, we've got basalts, we've got metasediments and metamorphized soils as well. So what I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about the Soil and Pasture Health Workshop series that I've been running in the area since 2014. I'm going to talk about some of the additional benefits of this workshop series that's kind of come about because of the workshop series. I'm going to be talking about the evaluations that we've been doing in those workshop series and examining some of that practice change that occurred. And also I'm going to be talking about 3 examples of on-ground demonstrations which have come about from these workshops. The importance of having fun and some of the key messages from those workshop series as well. You can see here, this is one of the sites I'll talk about a bit later on. This is a demo site that's kind of come out of these workshop series, and where we've been looking at different nutrients and things like lime as well. But this is not lime in this case, but snow. And you can see that some of the country that I cover gets a little bit cold. So just in terms of background, Local Land Services started in 2014, and I was new to the area, so I wanted to get a grasp on what people would like to know about. So I did a scoping study right at the beginning, and a survey asking them about what did they want to know in terms of soils and pastures, what did they want to know about soil health, soil testing, and what delivery method did they wanted as well. So what kind of information did they want to get, but how they wanted that information delivered. Was it short and sharp? Was it on ground? Was it long workshops? What kind of method would they like? As an Extension Advisory Officer, I see part of my role is about that, is taking that research that's occurred and thinking about that research in terms of what is adaptable for the landholders in my area, what is local, what's actually happened in the past as well, and what is kind of, I suppose, information that I suppose relevant for them. The other thing I also see my role is also hearing about what's happening on ground. So finding out what's actually happening on ground and taking that and sending that back up to the research train and saying, well, look, there's some things we've been seeing. Is this right? Or what else can we find out more about? I developed work there, and we also ran the Landscan series, New South Wales DPI Landscan series up there as well. And if you want to know a bit more about what we did up there, I do have the papers that Abby mentioned in the panel as well to have a look at. So the soil and pasture health workshops, what are some of the objectives that we wanted to cover? We wanted to get people understanding the importance of ground cover, the use of appropriate nutrients and pasture species, using soil tests to make more informed and soil and pasture management decisions, but also understanding group sessions, the Central Tablelands landscape. So understanding different soils, so people getting appreciation of different soils and the parent materials in the area as well. So part of the role I thought in terms of developing these workshops was using adult learning principles. So what can we do in terms of activities, hands-on, making it relevant for them, and also making it as a small group, so 10 to 20 participants max in these groups. So they've got an opportunity to have a say, but also they could talk about their situation as well. So the workshops were 2 days. They're 2 half days over 4, 5, 6 weeks. So allowing a bit of time between the 2 workshops, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But the day one, they bring some example soils. We do some simple tests in terms of structure and texture. We talk about some of the aspects of soil health, how to take soil tests, give them gear to take home with them to take some soil tests. But they also got some homework to do from between day 1 and day 2. And I asked them to go and have a look at their parent material and to bring a rock back into the next day, the day 2. And sometimes people bought a few rocks, some people bought loads of rocks and said that I could take them home if I wanted them. There was so many rocks in their place. But certainly to have a look at their parent materials, think about what that might mean in terms of soil types. They also got them to stop on some cuttings on the side of the road and look at soil horizons. So think about how deep that soil horizon might be. So how deep is that bucket? How big is that bucket? In some cases on the Central Tablelands, our soils to the bedrock may only be 10 centimetres before you hit bedrock. In some cases, it might be 2 metres deep. So thinking about the bucket size, so what have we got to work on in terms of soil? So getting them to take photos of those cuttings and think about the depth of their soils. I also gave them soil biology sampling calico strips. So we got them to take them home and they put them in their soils or in their veggie garden or in their paddocks, and then 4, 5, 6 weeks later to unearth them and bring them back for the day 2 as well. To talk about microbial activity. Now, that's changed just a little bit over the last year, and I'll talk more about that later on, but those calico strips are very useful in terms of talking about soil biology and activity in our soils. Part of the homework was to take those 2 soil samples, and it was up to them where they took those soil samples. So they could take them in an area that they thought there might be a bit of a problem in terms of salt, or there's a problem in their paddock, or it's part of their monitoring program, or it's anything they wanted, basically, they could do. So 2 samples, I collated those and then set them up to the soil testing laboratory. We used New South Wales DPI Environmental Lab at Wollongong for the whole series of these workshops. So we're very fortunate that we've had a great relationship with them as well. I also got them to investigate the limitations of their soil sampling areas. So a list of questions about, okay, so you might get a soil test and it may be a fantastic soil test and you're going through the numbers, everything's right, yep, and then you get to the paddock and it's full of rock, or it's very slopey, or it might be some limitation in this paddock. So getting them to think that soil testing is just part of that puzzle. So it's just one part of making decisions, and you need to think about the other limitations of what you might be doing. Then we got together 4, 5, 6 weeks later to go through those soil tests. So we went through those soil tests and looked at some of the benchmarks. We looked at the integration between soil and plant nutrition, and soils affecting plants, and the importance of organic matter on soil health. So we covered that in day 2. It's a lot to get through in day 2. And once again, an opportunity to learn from each other using group work. So each time we got together in the day 2s, I got them to talk about their soil test and what their management was in those paddocks, what are their pasture species in their paddock, and what they're hoping to do with those paddocks as well. So the group was able to learn from each other as well. Some of the resources that are used in these workshops, the ag guides from TOCAL, New South Wales DPI TOCAL, the ag guides managing for healthy soils. This ag guide, fantastic resource. I use it for the basis of my workshop series, so they can take that information away home with them and read it at their own leisure as well. The second day, they get the Fertiliser Central Ag Guide, and it's not necessarily about the fertiliser side of things, but it's about the benchmarks which are in there. So they have an opportunity to also have a copy of those benchmarks. A lot of people that came to the workshop weren't necessarily there for information on fertilisers, but were also there for monitoring their soils or setting up monitoring sites on their paddocks. So the soil health pasture health workshops, I've had 20 groups, actually had 21, but I'm just going to talk about the 20 groups at the moment. 20 groups and 216 properties over doing a day 1 and a day 2. It's a workshop series. From that, a lot of the groups wanted to go on and do more information. A lot of groups wanted to go on and do a day 3, which is around fertilisers, about understanding soil nutrition, understanding what trials are out there, what the trials mean, and learning a bit more about fertilisers themselves. So that's day 3. So we've had a few groups that have gone through day 3. We've had day 4s where the groups have gone off and looked at composting, gone off and had a look at pasture trials. And one group's actually gone on and done a day 5 where we've actually gone to South East LLS and visited Lagan and Crookwell looking at soil nutrition trials down there. So you can see the spin-off from these workshops have been groups going on and doing other things as well. I wanted to go back and say to those groups that started in 2014, 2015, to re-engage with them in terms of their soils. So last year I started a masterclass, and the masterclass allowing them to go back to do more soil sampling, to go back to those sites if they wanted to that they did originally, and see what had changed in that time. So re-engaging with them under a masterclass, and these was again 2 sessions. And once again 4 to 6 weeks apart, and I did 3 groups in those master classes as well. They also were able to take not just 0 to 10 centimetre samples as we had taken in the day 1s and day 2s series. We also looked at 10 to 20 centimetre soil depth as well, and able to talk about things like soil acidity at depths and things like that. So the other events that we able to do, we did a lunchtime seminar. We've done soil biology seminars as well, so getting deeper into that soil biology side of things, and as I mentioned, some tours as well from these groups. And further to that, we've also started some on-ground demonstrations, worked with groups in their information. They wanted to know a bit more about lime, or they wanted a bit more about pasture establishment and pasture species for different soil types. So working a bit more with groups, looking at on-ground demonstrations. So we've had a couple of nutrient trial sites and pasture establishment trial sites, and I'll talk more about those as well. But from that, I actually also developed last year a pasture fundamentals workshop. And this workshop's around not just the soil side of things, but getting people to think about the appropriate species, what pasture species, if they're sowing, are available, the maturity times, understanding endophytes, but also going further that and thinking about species for climate variability and climate change. So that pasture fundamentals workshops kind of sprung out from understanding a bit more about your soils to going a bit more about your pasture species. So what else have we learnt from the Soil and Pasture Health Workshop series? We also get information, I suppose, or intelligence, I suppose, on what's happening in terms of soils, management of those soils and those landscapes from the workshop series. And I collected all the information from the soil tests and presented a paper at the National Soils Conference in Canberra in 2018. And Peter Evans and myself wrote a paper for 154 properties and went down and said, well, you know, what are some of the things that we're finding in terms of these soil tests and the numbers, what they mean? So the soil and land degradation issues, for example, 77% of the samples were predicted to be responsive to phosphorus, 74% were predicted to be responsive to sulphur, 12% had organic carbon less than 1.5%, 86% of the samples were below pH of 5.5, and 22% of the samples had greater than 15% aluminium. Now, there's a bit of a rider on this, and that being that, as I mentioned, the landholders were able to take soil samples from wherever they wanted. So in some cases, some of these soils may be, they wanted to find out what was happening in their soils because it wasn't performing. So there may be a little bias in this information, but it gives us a bit of a rough guide of what's going on out there as well. As you can see down here on the photograph, this is a soil pH test that we did on day one. This soil actually got then sent off to laboratory and came back at a pH of 3.9. So the yellow indicator indicating it's very acid. So one of the things as an extension officer I like to know is not just that delivering that technical information, but has that information been taken up? Has there been practice change? Has there been something happened because of this workshop that we've been running? And it's hard to do in terms of soils and pastures because sometimes these are long-term things as well. It's not immediate. So as I mentioned, the scoping survey in 2014, but at each of the workshops at the end of the day twos, we also do evaluations. And these are important to know that the level of knowledge and skills on the topics presented, but the level of confidence in making decisions on their farm based on the training that we delivered, but also the change in practice as a result of this training. So that's right at the end of day two. So we were able to get a independent assessor, I suppose, to look at go and talk to people about what they had learnt away from us asking those questions. So the Writer Self group asked a number of questions about practice change and had they changed because of they'd been to these soil and pasture health workshops. So they did a big survey a few years ago and they said, how likely is it you changed practices as a result of this training and workshop? And you can see that 90% strongly agree with, they're highly likely to change because of the result of training, going to this training. Last year, I thought, right, okay, we'll go and have a look at the whole groups that happened between 2014 and 2019 and ask them to fill in a survey had they changed their practice because they'd been to this soil and pasture health workshop. So the next series of slides, just some of those questions that I asked, not all the questions, but certainly some of the questions that I asked in regards to attending the soil and pasture health workshop. So what attracted them to attend the workshop series? And you can see the top three being learning more about soil testing, learning more about pasture health and learning more about fertiliser. 78% of the people said they were strongly agreed that soil health is very important for pasture health. So that linkage was there between soil health and pasture health. And to what extent had you changed your practices by attending this workshop? And you can see that almost 73% indicated some form of substantial change because they had gone to this workshop. Then I asked them what they were, what changed, and listing down and grouping them: more specific type and rate of fertilisers and liming, more testing and regular testing, especially prior to pasture sowing, Suitable pasture species are not yet ready, or drought. And this actually came back a few times because we've been doing, I did this survey last year in the middle of the drought, and the last 2-3 years in some places in the Tablelands we've experienced a very bad drought. And that probably put a pause on a lot of things that might have happened. In terms of ground cover, do you manage your pastures, livestock and soil to keep good ground cover? And you can see there again, about 83% supported this comment. And once again, the comment came about that, no, they hadn't done anything because of the drought. And drought made decisions on what they were doing in terms of ground cover. So in some cases, we ran out of water in paddocks and they made decisions about water more so than ground cover. Previous to this workshop series, what was your past experience with soil testing? So this is a question I've asked over a number of years. Very similar results to what I got in the original scoping survey in 2014. Almost 43% had not taken a soil test prior to this workshop. And the top 4 reasons why not: they were new to the property, didn't understand what the numbers meant, didn't know how, and cost. And this comes up a number of times of a number of surveys that I've done in the past as well. If you change your management practices, can you describe what they were? And 95% answered this question, that they had changed their practices. Some said it confirmed what they were doing anyway. And those soil tests, no, because the soil tests were part of soil monitoring. So as I said, in some cases, people took soil tests as part of this workshop series for monitoring, not necessarily to make changes or to make decisions on fertilisers. The majority replied that the soil tests and workshop determined rate of fertiliser, emollients, a need for more testing, and ability to decide on appropriate pasture species. There's also comments on drought and decision making again in this question. What sort of decisions did your soil test results have the most effect on? And this is the top 3: fertiliser amount and rate, soil emollients such as lime, and crop and pasture choice. What would encourage you to soil test again? Comparison after changing a fertiliser program, the cost of soil testing and the dollars to do it, prior to renovating and sowing a new paddock, to know more about my soil, and now understanding the numbers, I can use it to my best advantage. And lastly, what aspects of your soil would you like to know more about? In terms of fertiliser requirements and nutrient balances, acidity and potential stratification, what happens at depth, soil biology, how to build soil carbon, and a lot of responses were again saying, we want to see it on ground. How do we do it as in trials as well? So those are just some of the questions that I pulled out from that survey. So what have I done? The Pasture and Fundamentals workshop came about from that information and that direction. On-ground demonstrations, which I'll talk about in a moment. The masterclasses, going back and revisiting those people who had done, or re-engaging with those people who had done those original workshops. And also being involved with the soil survey of acid soils and acid soils at depth with New South Wales DPI Soils Unit. So I wanted to talk about the three things that I suppose have come about, not only, but 3 things which have come about, I suppose case studies that have come about from those soil and pasture health workshops. This one's a little bit of a project that we did with the Precision Ag Research Group at the University of New England, where we looked at lucerne in the Mudgee area. And we had farmers who were saying that, yes, they had paddocks of lucerne and areas of that paddock which were not performing. And we had a sneaky suspicion that perhaps they were the old riverbeds, for example, going through those lucerne paddocks. So we're able to use an EM38, looking at 0.5 and 1 metre depth, and looking at whether we could see this difference in, say, soil texture across these paddocks and map those areas. And then talk to the farmers, the landholders, about how we might manage those areas or use different watering systems or more water in some cases in terms of a lighter soil. So that kind of came about from understanding a bit more about soils in the area. On the right-hand side there, you can see property 4, block 1. And this is an interesting block. It's a dryland lucerne block, this one. And this is an alluvial soil. And above it, north of it, so above the actual diagram there, the red, and you can see there's a little bit of blue at the top. Above that is a paddock, which is a granite soil and a duplex soil, and this is alluvial soil. And he often describes that the lucerne is not doing so well just at that point, and suspected there was some salinity, and we were able to determine there was a bit of salinity after doing some soil tests as well. The interesting part of this this survey that we did looking at the lucerne producers, that in the 0 to 10 centimetre samples, 33% of them had a pH less than 5.5. And at the 10 to 20 centimetres depth, 42% of them had a pH of less than 5.5. So fairly acidic soil types with lucerne growing them. And that's not a representative of all the paddocks in Mudgee, but that's the paddocks that we had a look at. We also used some new technology looking at things like NDVI and seeing if we could pick up the difference in growth and the amount of growth that was there in those paddocks as well, if we could map up these areas. So we used a fair bit of different technology to kind of map where these areas were. The other one I wanted to mention was a trial site at Edith, just outside Oberon. 1080 metres above sea level, so quite cold. This is a 4 copsefoot paddock with a bit of subclover, and this is a paddock that we had a hard seed legume trial in many years ago, and have converted it, or the site converted into a nutrient demonstration site. So going on ground and getting people to think about, you know, if they're putting out 10 kilograms of phosphorus or 20 kilograms of phosphorus, what that might look like, and you know, whether we use phosphorus or sulfur, or what form do we use. In this case, we used, it's a bit crazy kind of in terms of lines, but you can see that we did plus P plus S, plus P plus S, double the amount, nil, plus S plus P, lime, plus P plus S plus N, and plus N. And the farmer was very keen also to look at gibberellic acid, and we also added 2 applications of GA at 2 different times in winter last year, and able to measure growth rates, quality, and things like that as well. So it's in a very dominant site where people can go past and have a look over the fence and see what's happening as well. So a really good opportunity for people to see what's going on ground. Very small, just a demonstration, but certainly gets people out looking at things instead of just looking at soil tests and things on paper, I suppose. The next one is a site that came about from a group of farmers very, very keen to see how some new species, but also some species survived in the area. And this is at Tarana, just outside Rydal and Oberon. And it is a small site, it's a demonstration site, and looking at pasture establishment with different species, but also looking at a lime at different rates as well. It's a fairly acid site, and the group very keen on knowing a bit more about survival of these species and new species, and we're working with the Lithgow Oberon Landcare Group, Lola, and also DR Agriculture, David Harbison's agriculture consultant, and working with them to work out, you know, how these species may survive over time, and using I suppose a demonstration of where there's no lime at 5 tonnes per hectare and lime at 2.5 tonnes per hectare, and that's been in the ground for just over a year now. So once again, a site where people go and discuss these things and talk about things in the paddock. So from the day 1s and day 2s, you can see that we've had day 3, day 4s and day 5s with the groups. We've had other events. And then there's the on-ground demonstrations and these masterclasses kind of re-engaging with these people and putting things in practice, I suppose, as well. So last couple of slides, I just wanted to talk about some of the things we cover in the Healthy Soils project, the Healthy Soils workshops. So as you know, we're looking at the physical nature of the soil interacts with soil biology interacts with soil chemistry and nutrients, and each of those interact with each other, the importance of soil organic matter. So one of the things that we have is, and it's the most exciting part, is we don't know much about soil biology and how to get people talking about soil biology and the activity and what makes activity happen in the soil. So in the past, I've used the calico strips, and these are just 20 centimetre strips of calico. They go in the soil after day 1. They unearth them by day 2. We go and have a look at those on day 2 as a group of what's actually the activity. So you can see there on the right-hand side, there's the plain calico strip, and there's the calico strip 4 or 6 weeks later, and you can see there's a little bit of lightening of the calico, and there's a little bit of activity that's gone on there. So instead of that, because of SNoK and because of a webinar I went to with Oliver Knox, I thought, yeah, Ollie talked about soiling your undies and having a bit of fun, and I thought, yeah, okay, I can do that. So it's not my idea. I borrowed it from the cotton community, amongst others. There's others who are doing it as well, and it's based on cotton undies instead of the calico. So similar idea. Putting the undies, burying the undies, laying them flat in the soil, 10 centimeters below, or roughly that, in your veggie garden or out in the paddock or wherever you might want to put where you might have put the calico strips in the past, and then coming back 4 to 6 weeks later and at day 2 and showing us your undies. So a lot of hilarity, a lot of laughter. I always get red when I'm pulling out the undies and saying, let's go and soil our undies. But it's a good way to have a bit of fun, have a bit of, I suppose, yeah, it's about fun and learning at the same time as well, and understanding about activity. Now, as you can see, I'm holding up two undies there on the ones which have been eaten, I suppose, which is just the band left. That was actually the Mudgee group last year, and that was actually in 5 weeks. And that was actually in a paddock that had a lot of feed out of straw and hay on top of it. So certainly disintegrated quite a bit as well. So certainly that's been a bit different way of telling the same story and having a little bit of fun. So just in terms of key messages, look, I think it's been a successful program in terms of engagement, but certainly in terms of practice change and increasing awareness of soil health. The importance of measuring and monitoring and ground cover has certainly come through as well. And those people now often go and take soil tests and come back and say, right, I haven't been part of the project, but I want to know a bit more about soil testing and what those numbers mean. It's given us a bit of intelligence on soils and pastures, but also the management of those soils. So if we come across a sodic subsoil, for example, talking to them about how you might manage that and perhaps not ploughing it up, those kind of things. So for example, giving a good kind of idea of what people are doing on their properties as well. It ties in with current research into soil acidity and nodulations of legumes. So some of that work that Belinda Hackney did in that survey that was carried out, but talking about what that might mean in terms of soil acidity and nodulation of our legumes. So that's been really good to integrate that, and also having some fun while getting the message across as well. So just in terms of acknowledgements, this project is jointly funded through the Central Tablelands Local Land Services, the Australian Government's National Land Care Program, and the New South Wales Government Catchment Action Funding. So we've been very lucky to have this funded for that long. Peter Evans, Shanine Treasurer and Michelle Hines have been very helpful in terms of helping me collate the evaluation surveys as well. And look, really the participants of the workshop series who openly discuss their soils, pastures and management. I've learned a lot from them, and hopefully they've learned a lot from me as well. You can see here on the right hand side, landholders checking subclover nodulation. This is a group south of Bathurst that have got together, I think it's for the 4th year now. They meet 2, 3, 4 times a year, sometimes to do soils, but sometimes with pastures, sometimes with drought workshops, information about feeding out and things like that. And this is actually, we got together last year and got them to bring their subclover plants in and have a look at their subclover nodulation that was occurring in their root systems. And so we're able to wash them in freezing cold water and have a look at the nodulations. Was it pink? What did that mean? And describe their soils where they got these subclovers, and also talk about their subclover varieties as well. So it's been a really good kind of opportunity, which was a group that we did the soil and pasture health workshops. They went off and did the masterclasses, they've gone on tours as well. And to get together and do this last year was quite exciting as well. So that's me, Abby.
Great, thank you. I think it's you've shown really well how to value add what you do, as well as sustain interest and activity in soils, and show how soils fits into the whole system of farming, which is great. So as I said before, we now have time for questions, and I have a few. Oh, there's also a comment. I'll start with a comment from Oliver Knox, and he says, that's great. He loves what you're doing. Make sure you get your farmers to post their plants on the new cotton info map. So they're obviously collecting some information about that, which is great. Teresa Chapman has said that super interesting workshop series. How did you find your participants?
Yeah, okay. So I was new in the area in 2014, and we did a series of field days to start with. We actually, when we started in 2014, we actually started in drought, and also going out and doing some media releases and explaining what we were trying to do. But we did a fair few pasture identification days as well. And those people, I said, well, let's go learn about soils. Is that what you want to know about? And so that evaluation survey also tied in with how we got the participants to start the ball rolling. And now we just do a bit of media. We have a newsletter that goes out every month from the Central Tablelands called Tablelands Telegraph, and that has events on it as well. So I think that's how we've kind of grown as well in terms of people being able to come to the workshop and still continue to this day as well. I've still got 2 workshops ready to go, but had to be postponed at this point in time because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully we'll run those when things get a bit clearer later on.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that question, Teresa. The next question comes from Kathy Dawson, and Kathy said, to what extent do you consider the continuity of LLS personnel in the area as a factor in maintaining participant engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, putting the person aside, it's also about people wanting to know about soil health, and I think that's really, really important. And to link that to on-ground information and to value add to that, I think that's important. So I think it's also understanding what landholders want and need as well. I think it's also say that the masterclass was going back to those people and re-engaging with them as well. I think that's important. So if you've done workshops in the past, is to go back and see what you can value add to those workshops or re-engage with those people. I think that's been important.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Julie White's asked, she said, I may have missed this, but did you mention how many participants there were in your workshops?
Yeah, so we usually run them between 10 and 20, and that's husband and wife or manager or son and daughter coming along. And there's 20 groups and 216, I think I said. Yeah, 216 properties been involved with the workshop series. That's the day 1s and day 2s.
Okay, thanks, Julie. I hope that. And Teresa's asked another question. Did you have much engagement from larger landholders?
Yes, the answer is yes. The area that I cover has a proportion of absentee Sydney landholders and small landholders, but certainly in the area, the group south of Bathurst, for example, a lot of those landholders are 2nd, 3rd, 4th generational commercial farmers, and certainly we've been able to go along and do other workshops with them as well. So very much a mixture, I think. Yes.
Lisa Lobry de Bruin up in Armidale's asked, did you find your survey helpful in understanding the value of the workshop? That's a good question.
Yeah, great question, Lisa. Yes, and the series of slides that I put up were just a bit of a bite size of what I asked and some of the answers. And I would really like to do some case studies and go back to some of those people who have gone through the workshop series, gone on to do other things as well, and was at the point or trigger that's allowed them to go on and do other things as well. So that would be certainly something I could possibly do in the future. But certainly there was a lot more questions which I didn't go into, and love to write a paper a bit more into that detail of the changes that occurred because they had been to the original workshop series.
Okay, Sandy Delwo has asked, when you mentioned the husband and wife business partners, are you suggesting that it's important to have a couple of people from the same business at the workshops? That's a good question.
Yeah, yes and no. There's sometimes a bit of discussion between what they might want to do with that paddock, but also son and daughter being there as well. And I don't limit it in terms of how many people can come from a business type thing. But when we sit down on day 2 and we go through the soil tests and the whole group gets to see somebody else's soil test as well, it gives them, I suppose, an idea of where they sit, and perhaps they're not too acidic, or perhaps they're not too badly off compared to everybody else. But there is a little bit of discussion that occurs, and it doesn't have to be husband and wife. It could be wife and manager, for example, kind of thing. So it doesn't worry me. But there's often a little bit of discussion that goes on there about what are they going to do with the paddock next, and tell me what's in the paddock, and what have you done with that paddock as well. Part of their homework in terms of their soil testing is that they actually have to go home and go through their filing cabinets and find out what they've put in terms of nutrients on in the past, or their grazing management on those paddocks as well. So there's a bit of discussion. They bring that paperwork back with them, and then often there's a bit of discussion about, oh no, we did this, oh no, we did that. So certainly it just clarifies a little bit of what actually happened, the history of that paddock. So there isn't so many arguments, and people kind of forget a little bit too. So. But certainly there is that discussion that we have at the end. In the masterclass, we actually get them to say, oh, here's 2 paddocks. What are you going to do with these paddocks? You've got unlimited resources in terms of dollars. What are you going to do with these 2 paddocks? And there's a lot of discussion between partners about what would they do with these paddocks.
Oh, that sounds like a great exercise. Okay, so thank you for that question, Sandy. Another question from Kathy Dawson. How reticent have you found farmers to be in answering the questions describing their practice change?
I think, yeah, look, the survey last year, because I wanted to know kind of what happened in those years, I think one of the overriding things, look, I didn't have a huge response to that survey as well, I must admit. I'd like to know everybody's results as well and what was happening. But I think the drought really kind of made some comments come out very clear, and a lot of things have been put on pause as well. People just not able to make decisions around their soils because at that particular point in time they were feeding animals, making decisions about water. There was other priorities. So in terms of when you do a survey and the responses you get can be very much their immediate decision making, which is fair enough. It was absolutely horrendous. But certainly how you get away from that, do you only do it in good years? I don't know, but certainly I wanted to see how things were travelling, so we make a decision about where we might go next in terms of workshop series, or what information we deliver. Do we do the same thing again with new people coming in, with people who would like to do this workshop, or do we change it up a little bit? So yeah, I think it was not the best time to do the survey in hindsight, but it was what we did.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I just think that highlights the importance of maintaining communication and engagement over the long term. And as you said earlier in your presentation, that sometimes, the effects of what you do may take some time to show up. So all that means time is important. You've partly answered a question, or part of the question that Lisa Lobby de Bruins asked about whether there are any questions you wished you'd asked. So you kind of wished maybe that wasn't the best time to do the survey, but were there questions that you didn't include that now you think would have been a good idea too?
Yes, I think so. I think, how do we address, say, soil biology, where it's such an exciting part of soil health, and what decisions people make about soil biology, and what's out there. I think because it's so new, it's not new, there's nothing new about it, but it's about how do we can talk about soil texture and soil structure and soil testing, but soil biology is that kind of big unknown. And I would certainly like to ask some more questions about what they're seeing and what decisions they're making regarding their soil biology, definitely.
Yeah, and it really is something that the individual has to sort of monitor and engage with.
And do they? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Lisa. Kate Kirk said, fabulous presentation, Claire. Made everyone's favourite subject, soils, front and centre, so that's great.
Awesome.
Kathy Dawson also asked if there was a cost to the workshops. Just a quick question.
At this stage, no. It was under the incentive programs, and the incentive programs being around those objectives of ground cover, appropriate species, making sure we've got good perennials, but also around understanding the soils as well. So being very fortunate, it's been part of an incentive project, and they do get the resources, they get the soil tests, but it's also having the mobility to also understand a bit about that soil testing, that it's just part of the puzzle, but also being able then to engage with their produce store or their agribusiness. If they're going to talk about fertilisers, they don't need to put phosphorus on, they don't need to have that product that has phosphorus, for example. So it's about awareness and it's about education.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate and Kathy. Oliver's got another question here. Any advice or thoughts on how we keep delivering effective messaging during the current travel restrictions to our growers? That's an interesting question, Oliver.
I think I've got a plan. I think I've got a cunning plan. It is hard because a lot of what I do is about adult learning principles. It's about hands-on. It's about explaining, doing activities, a bit of repetition. So it's getting people to understand how that impacts them. So how do we do that when we're often now sitting in front of a computer screen or at the end of the
webinar.
Have a webinar. Yes, excellent. So yeah, how do we then engage, but also help people with their practice change or adoption of that information? And I think that's hard. That's a really good question. I think one of the things with soils is we want to be able to feel our soils. Just before we got locked down, we were actually doing a property planning course, and we were doing soil textures and structures, and I had them wearing gloves, for example, and that was 2.5 months ago now. But we need to feel our soils. We need to touch our soils. We need to smell our soils. So how do we do that? But also learning from other people as well. So learning about their soils. So standing 2 meters away and smelling their soils or touching their soils is really, really hard. So yes, I think part of it is delivery this way, but part of me in terms of adult learning is how do we do that when I'm working with my hands here and showing you texture and structure and just kind of how do we get people engaged, but also how do we show them about soils as well? I think that's hard.
That's a Pandora's box of a question, I reckon.
Yeah.
There's so many things in there about doing and how we communicate and whether we feel comfortable doing it that way and whether things will change and the technology involved and how difficult that is to be out in a paddock when you've got an iPad and stuff like that. So interesting.
Like YouTubes or
interesting
anything, that type of
days.
thing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So Richard Stevens has said, thank you, Claire, great work. On one of the slides, there was a box saying new pasture fundamentals workshop. Is this another workshop or a different format to what you outlined in the webinar?
No, it's a different workshop. It's a new workshop, and it's a one-day workshop. It's about people knowing about the appropriate pasture species to sow. So if people going out and thinking about sowing pastures, what's available, what might suit their area, but also understanding some of the terms like hard seed legumes, what does that actually mean? If it's mid-flowering or late flowering, what does that mean? And then thinking about climate change and climate variability, what does that mean in terms of selecting species, for example? So it's kind of moved on from, it's a kind of additional workshop. It's a new workshop, but it's kind of about making sure we select the most appropriate species for our landscape. So it's a new workshop. Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Richard. Sarah Dad has asked, did you ask any questions around why people found adoption or change difficult? So those barriers, that's a good question.
Yeah, barriers to adoption. There is a couple of questions on those. And as I said, in hindsight, perhaps the survey time was not most appropriate because a lot of those questions came back in regarding to drought and just people putting things on hold at the moment because there was other things which were prioritised, which is fair enough. So in hindsight, the barriers to adoption question perhaps wasn't the it probably didn't tease it out enough to present it today.
Yeah, or the way it's worded is not, specific enough. Jennifer Bethel has said, are your workshops open to farmers outside of New South Wales? Not sure where Jennifer's coming from.
Hello, Jennifer. Yeah, look, at the moment, the funding, the incentive programs around Central Tablelands local land services, but I'm happy to talk to Jennifer about how that might happen. There may be other ones out there as well in terms of where she might be, but certainly I'm happy to talk to her offline about the workshop series.
Great. All right, Jennifer, that's there's Claire's email address too is up on the screen, so if you wanted to jot that down, you can do that. And Lisa Lobby de Bruins put in a comment related to the question that Oliver had about COVID extension and development, and said short YouTube clips ? No, that's something that we're going to try a little bit and see how that goes, but it doesn't go to that point of what you were saying, Claire, of being really practical and feeling your soil. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
They'll be great as additional resources. I think that's great. And I think people then being able to do it on farm, even to the point of maybe doing a YouTube and saying people can go out there, video yourself doing it, and then Zoom it back in, or whatever platform you want to use to come back in and to the presenter and see that you're doing it right or something like that. So I think there's an opportunity to do that. But one of the things I said I'm struggling with is group work, and the beauty of group work, learning from each other, is so important when it comes to soils as well.
Yeah, my experience with that is that you can do it online, but I think people need to know each other quite well prior to being online. So if the first time they've met online, then that's going to be really tricky and stilted, I think. You need to give quite a bit of time for that rapport to develop. So that's my take on that. Now that looks like we've got to the end. I'll just double check and see if we've answered all the questions. I think we have. So we're bang on 10:30, which is great. So the timing's really good. So I would just like to thank Claire for presenting. It's really interesting, and obviously people were really interested. We got lots of questions, which is fantastic. And also thank Luke, who's lurking in the background there on the telephone line, and thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you next month. I'm just checking my paperwork to see who we have next week. Next month we have a joint webinar. The June webinar will be a joint one with the Fertiliser Stewardship Group, which is being run through a project that DPI and Fisheries are doing here called the Clean Coastal Catchments, and it's around soil sampling and analysis and things like that. So we've got Jeff Clark from FertCare and Graham Lancaster from the Soil Analytical Laboratory at Southern Cross University up here, so keep your eye out for that. If you're interested, the invitation. If you're not signed up, sign up. And also I'll just draw your attention to the previous SNoK webinars. There's two places you can find them. You can go to the DPI Agriculture YouTube channel, have a look at the soils pages, and they're embedded there. And there's also the go-to stage, which has got that little address there, which has got the unedited versions. So there's lots of opportunities to catch up on what you may have missed. So just to thank Claire again and Luke, and yeah, we'll see you all next month, hopefully. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.